friends, and welcome to Hidden Scriptures Word Study number 162. This is going to be comments on the Sabbath Torah reading for October 11th, part 1. And the title I have is Leaving Some of the Harvest for Others. This past Sabbath, we read the scripture list below, but today I want to focus on the following passage pulled from the reading in the Torah. Okay, here's the complete reading for October the 11th. For those of you who are interested, there it is right there. Okay, but today I want to focus on Leviticus chapter 23, starting in verse 22. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the edges of your field, nor gather the gleaning of your harvest. You are to leave them for the poor and for the stranger. Stranger there is H1616, and it is talking about the foreigner, the alien, the sojourner, indicating a Gentile. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. Okay, so this is the Torah command from the Father that the reapers were not to go all the way to the edge of the field, and they were not to go over the field a second time. Okay, the Father provided for the poor and for the Gentile by giving this command. This is what the Father instructed his people concerning the harvest. Let's read how this command provided food for Naomi and the grafted in Gentile Ruth, the Moabitess, who turned out to be the great grandmother of King David many years later. Okay, and I'm just going to pull a few select verses out of the book of Ruth, which I highly recommend. I love reading the book of Ruth. We read the complete book several times a year. That's a wonderful book. Anyway, I'm going to just read a few select verses. Ruth chapter 2 and verse 2. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field. Okay, this is after they returned to Bethlehem. Remember, Naomi's husband died, and then her two sons died, and then of her two daughter-in-laws, one returned back to her father's house, and Ruth insisted on staying by the side of Naomi. It's a wonderful, wonderful read. Ruth became a grafted in. She became grafted in to the children of Israel, to the house of Israel, to the commonwealth of Israel, is how Paul explains it in Ephesians, somewhere in the neighborhood of chapter 2 and verse 12. Okay, so Ruth chose, just like the Gentiles in Egypt who came out of Egypt, with the children of Israel, Ruth, a Gentile, a Moabitess, chose to become a part of the house of Israel. Okay, so we're going to pick this up in Ruth chapter 2 and verse 2, after Ruth and Naomi have arrived back at Bethlehem from the land of Moab. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one of the reapers, in whose sight I may find favor. Naomi said to her, go, my daughter. So Ruth went and picked up the leftover grain in a field after the reapers. And she happened to stop at the plot of land belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Verse 5. Then Boaz said to his servant, after Boaz arrived back at his fields that were being harvested, then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? Because Boaz saw this strange woman out in his field following after the reapers. The servant in charge of the reapers answered Boaz, She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab, and she said, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and has continued gathering grain from early morning until now, except when she sat resting for a little while in the field house. Then Boaz said to Ruth, listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but stay here close by my maids. Watch which field they reap and follow behind them. I have commanded the servants not to touch you. And when you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink what the servants draw. Okay, then we drop down to verse 23. So Ruth stayed close to the maids of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest. And she lived with her mother-in-law Naomi. Because of the provision provided by the Father in the Torah about the procedure of reaping, well, Ruth and Naomi, they had food probably for the whole year because they were able to gather enough grain, started off with barley, then came the later wheat harvest. So they were able to have enough grain and store enough grain where they could bake bread and have food to eat for probably a whole year. Okay, because of the Father's command, way back at Mount Sinai when the Torah was given, Naomi and Ruth were provided with food when they arrived back at Naomi's ancestral home in Bethlehem from the land of Moab with nothing but the clothes on their backs. So when Naomi and Ruth, when they arrived back at Naomi's ancestral home, man, they didn't have nothing. They had nothing. So thanks to the Father's provision back in the Torah, they had food. Okay, that's a wonderful, wonderful story. Okay, so let's fast forward to the New Covenant writings and read about another event concerning grain. Okay, Matthew 12, 1 and 2. At that particular time, Yahushua went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pick the heads of grain to eat them. But when the Pharisees saw this, they said to Yahushua, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. Now, were the Messiah's disciples really doing what was unlawful on the Sabbath? Well, let's go back to the Torah and find out. We go back to Deuteronomy 23, verse 24 and 25. When you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, as many as you please, but you shall not put any in your basket to take with you. Okay, verse 25. When you come into the standing grain, which is what they were doing right here, of your neighbor, you may pluck the ears of grain with your hand, but you shall not wield a sickle in your neighbor's standing grain to harvest it. So no, even though in the past we were taught to believe that the Messiah allowed his disciples to break the Sabbath, the Messiah's disciples were not breaking the Sabbath. What they were breaking were the unlawfully added rules and regulations of the Pharisees, whom the Messiah called to their faces, hypocrites and children of the devil. These Pharisees were considered to be such by the Messiah, hypocrites and children of the devil, because they put on this great facade of being men of Yah Elohim and teachers of the Torah, but they refuse to obey what they were teaching others to obey. The following is an excellent explanation of what is going on with this event, as found in page 107 of Michael Rood's Chronological Gospels at the link below. Okay, so this is out of Michael Rood's Chronological Gospels, page 107 at the top of the page. By Pharisee law, it became impossible for the poor to feed themselves on the Sabbath by walking into a field and plucking the grain as provided by the Torah. The Pharisees decreed that plucking the grain heads was harvesting, rubbing the chaff off the grain was threshing, and eating the grain was grinding. The Messiah taught his disciples by example to disregard the rules of man-made religion. All right, so that is what I wanted to cover in part one of what jumped out at me in the Torah portion reading this past October 11th. I hope you folks were able to glean something from this. I hope it helped somebody, and I will leave it here for today. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to being with you again in the next Hidden Scriptures Word Study. Remember, where there is no fear, there is no obedience. Where there is no obedience, there is no covenant. Where there is no covenant, there is no hope. Okay, folks, we'll see you next time. Shalom.